Hi, welcome to the Louder Than Silence podcast with your host, CG Wagner. This episode is part of the series From Survivor to Leader, where the other staff members and I are having discussions about all things LTS, what it means to be leading this work in caring for survivors of sexual violence. It's a mix of our own personal experiences, the work that our team does, and then how those two things impact each other. Our hope is that survivors feel seen and validated, and supporters gain a deeper understanding of what the healing process is like. Our episode today is sharing your story. We came up with this discussion after recording our last episode, which was when your support system doesn't actually support you. We realized that we needed a longer conversation about what it looked and looks like for us to share our survivor stories. With me today, I have our social media and marketing manager, Christy, our program manager, Joe, and development manager, Brittany. So thank you, ladies, as always, for being part of this. And because we have limited time, jumping right in, what was it like for you to share your story the first few times?
I think for me, the sharing my story the first two times, I was really sweaty. So if I can, I like still remember the physiological of it. Um, and I was really nervous. And so I have two separate incidences that stand out to me. First, as a child, excuse me, as a child, just a different dynamic. I had lived at a children's home for a period of time. And so I experienced CSA in that children's home. And so my first encounter in sharing my story, like telling someone, not telling on someone, does that make sense? Like letting someone, sharing something with someone, was actually with my grandmother, and also with my mom. And so at some point when I came home from the children's home, I shared with them, at different times, what occurred. So when I think back to those moments in time as a child, I probably was maybe sixth grade, and and it was more met with the dynamic around, the regret of us being at a children's home as opposed to what had happened. Um, and so after that, I didn't really say anything again. And then I think I was probably, like sometime in my 20s when I shared again, just more briefly about the CSA. Like I had no people would ask if my kids could spend the night. I have five kids. And so by let's say not by 21 I had five kids, I did not, but like I have five children. And so there were different things that I wasn't willing to do. I wasn't willing to let my kids spend the night with someone. I wasn't willing to let my kids play hide and seek. I wouldn't let them ride a school bus. There were like all these things that kind of played into that, and those were all places I experienced harm. And so when you're talking with another mom, okay, and you're telling that mom, oh no, we don't do sleepovers, um, I would kind of dribble it out. Oh, I have a poor experience with sleepovers, and so I would rather not do sleepovers. They can do all the things during the day, whatever, and then carry on. So it wasn't adverse or anything like that. It was more just like in little bitty dribbles, and it felt weird. And then obviously going through LTS, and kind of putting this narrative together, a story narrative together, and having a better idea of it. Then in sharing in that space, that looked very different for me because I wasn't having to explain, um, all the different responses I was experiencing. Instead, it was just more like it just felt more accepted or acceptable, not what was done to me, but more of just me telling it. Like I wasn't having to be like, "But I'm okay now." Like I wasn't having to manage anything. I was just simply able to tell. And so that looked very different for me.
I felt very scared. Like I felt the whole experience of sharing what happened to me was really scary. Um, I had multiple assaults throughout my early first couple of decades on Earth. And I didn't share anything until I was a freshman in college. Um, I didn't know if I would be believed. I didn't know how my closest friends and family would respond. And honestly, it did not go well. This was sharing before Louder Than Silence. I shared with a close family member that I had been raped by my college boyfriend and was met with, these things happen. You just have to move on. That almost happened to me once, and I had to move on. It, it was not what I was expecting. It left me feeling very alone, very just cold, kind of numb. And I moved on. I guess I put it in a box and kept going. But it definitely didn't serve me. Um, Now sharing during and after Louder Than Silence looked a lot different for the most part. I shared with people I knew were safe, and I got to hear, I believe you for the first time, and that changed everything. It was incredibly powerful to look around and see people whose faces told me that they understood this is me sharing within the Louder Than Silence cohort. They were willing to sit in my story with me, and they weren't trying to fix anything, but they were there believing me and empathizing, accepting my experience. And I also shared with a few people who weren't safe. And for me, fortunately, I knew this time kind of what to expect. Their responses were still hurtful, and I wish it were different, but it is what it is. And the big thing is that I'm different now, and I was different after going through Louder Than Silence. And so I had more breadth to see that their response was from a place that honestly needs healing. And I hope they get that someday.
Yeah, my experience is kind of interesting to think of like the first few times because I feel like I still am having first because like I was I'm a childhood survivor, so I like but I also repress the memory. So I remember in like middle school having somebody tell me what happened to them and being like, I think something like that happened to me too. And I think that was the first time I ever voiced the fact that I was a survivor, but I didn't even really know that like all the details to what that meant or how that actually happened. Um, and so it's interesting because it was like I've had these little firsts as I've like figured out my story because it has been this like figuring it out. And actually, like this week, I had another first. Or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but I had a conversation with my sister and told her about some things that I realized were sexual violence in my adult experience, which was the first time I had told her. I've shared in the LTS community as I'm kind of unraveling it myself. But it was the first time that I told, I think, anyone outside of the community. And Christy, you were talking about like the body responses. I very much had that, like my throat start to close up, I start to get sweaty, and it's like that cold sweat where you're like shivering, sweating, and then just like tense, all this tension in your chest, and I feel like I stop taking full breaths. I like take these little breaths, and I remember my fear was that I was, and I still have this fear around this, specifically the adult stuff, of just like, am I being dramatic? Am I making this more than it is? Um, and it's still like every time it still comes up, no matter, I mean, it's like I said, it's still early on in the process of saying it out loud and digging into the reality of what I've experienced. But I still have that voice of disbelief within myself. And that just shows me that I am still at a place where like it is very important to only share with people who I know will believe me. Because I don't think I could handle being met, or it wouldn't go well for me emotionally if I was met with disbelief when I still am struggling with so much disbelief within myself.
Yeah, Joe, as you were just saying about like taking really shallow breaths, I'm like sitting here, I'm like, am I breathing right now? Like what is happening? It's like note to self, keep breathing. All right. Um, so for me, I had experiences similarly in childhood and adulthood. Um, and when I was 18 and like about like leaving for college is when I finally felt like I could like say something to somebody. And I tried to share with a couple of people who were also teenagers. Like they were friends, right? And so I would say the responses weren't like particularly bad, but they weren't helpful. It was just like I said a thing and then it was just kind of like, okay, like nobody knew what to do after that. It was just like here it is, and then everything kind of like fizzled out from there. And I did have one set of friends that after I told them, one person came to me later to say that the other person brought it up to say that they thought I was lying about the situation. And then for some reason it felt like a good decision for the other person to relay that to me. And so I had forgotten that I had even tried to share with those people until maybe like 5 years ago. Like it had been like it was so like disconnected from my reality that when I thought I shared for the first time was when I was 30. So basically a decade ago. And and so like when I was like thinking of this question, it was thinking through this like, oh right, like I remember typing it all up and like reading word for word, so I had to try to like remember how things connected, and then being like, oh yeah, except for all those other times that were actually the first times that I shared with people that I totally forgot existed. And and so when I think about though, like really addressing these things and like sharing for the first few times as a like, all right, like I'm actually facing this for real. It was all the things that Christy and Joe said, the sweating, the like tightness, the shallow breathing. But I was also so dissociated that it almost felt like being high. Like I don't know how else to describe it other than like I felt like on the brink of like passing out because of just like how dissociated I was from like what was happening within me while I'm like trying to read from the page at the same time. And so I would get to the end of sharing and be like I couldn't even have told you any of the words that I said. Like it was like another person reading something else. Like it didn't feel like me at all. And it um the first few people that I shared with, like in full adulthood when I was like actually facing things, um, then like tipped over into full dysregulation themselves, and then it became a lot of like comforting them to like help them feel okay with the concept of what I had lived through, which really made me very angry. Like I was very angry at this like this is my life though. Like you can't handle just hearing what my life was lived through this hell. And so like then having to like really work through that anger component with like why couldn't you just hear me and like not make it about you? Um, and it was very tough. And I will hopefully always remember the first time that I shared where somebody responded well, and it was another survivor, right? So like not surprising, but of course it's not my place to share their story, but their response was a like something like that happened to me too. And I like some version of I believe you. And and that was the first time that I had this glimpse of like, oh, we need more spaces where like we can do this, where survivors can talk to each other and just like express that they believe each other. Um, but it's definitely taken some energy to work through some of those like very challenging initial responses and the the type of like letting go of resentment slash forgiveness, however you want to think about that, that comes from asking for support and basically having somebody say, it's too much and I won't, is like that's a special kind of pain for sure. So on that nice light note, our next question is how long did it take for you to be able to share your whole story? Like a lot of us have the like, oh, like I shared like this piece or like this piece, but what did it look like for you to get to this point where it's like, okay, I can sit with the entirety of what this is and hold space for however the other person responds.
It's a good question. Hopefully my Wi-Fi
All right, Christy, we're
Did
losing you.
I break up? Yeah.
Yep,
It's because my internet's unstable. Okay. Is it back?
it's back now. Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah. So as far as, sharing the fullness of it, I think the more that the first time I did that was within LTS and within my cohort. And then what's interesting is when I went to grad school and was going through a lot of different courses to become a therapist, then there's other parts that showed up for me. And so, as far as in its entirety, no, because I think just having that knowledge base then lends to or has allowed me to, like, it has lent to, um, like, oh, that's interesting, that thing occurred and how, like, I was sitting there thinking as you guys all shared, as I get itchy, just kidding. But when I first disclosed to, my mom or my grandmother, so as a kid, you don't grow out of ADHD, but like, I was hanging out with ADHD back in the 80s. And so I also just lied a lot. And so, like, it kinda made me sit there and think like, "Oh," and not that that's an ADHD thing, but it was just, for whatever reason, I probably couldn't tell the truth to save my life as a kid, um, all the time, and I guess it would depend on who it was with, but, and so I was sitting there reflecting even on that little insight and going, "Oh, maybe that's why the response wasn't like a response that I would give as a mother," of like holding space and believing and those different things because of just the trauma and the history in my childhood. A lot there wasn't just CSA. There was a lot of right early childhood trauma. I mean, I was living at a children's home um, for a couple of years, and so it's just that dynamic of like even. So I don't even think the full story is full, right? Because like even when listening to you guys, I was like, oh, that's right. Like behaviorally, there were some things that I noticed about myself back then as a child, um, which shaped me not saying something again until way later. When we navigated something ourselves with someone, and it just brought it to light. And that was in adulthood. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that story goes. It's developing.
It also took me attending my first Louder Than Silence cohort to share my full story. Um, I didn't feel like I had a reason to share it before. There was never an opportunity. There were people that knew certain parts of my story, and I guess I never thought to string everything together. Um, I'd never sat down and really thought about the multiple instances at one time. Um, and I honestly, until Louder Than Silence, I'd never sat with all that I had actually walked through, all that I had endured. I truly never realized the hell that I'd been through and come out on the other side of. And, doing it came with a lot of grieving, a heck of a lot of healing. And then on the other side, there's this empowerment, there's this knowing that like nobody wants to go through this, but when you are in a place when you're walking through healing, when you're on the other side, because healing is always, as we've talked about, like how much of a badass you are. Like it's no small thing. It really isn't. Even to just share, I remember the evening I shared my story with my cohort for the first time. And CG, like what you said, there was a high of I couldn't remember everything I said, but I walked out feeling like freaking Wonder Woman. Like I had done something so powerful and so great. And it wasn't even just for me. It didn't feel like I did this thing and now I am like all powerful and all great. It was I did this thing and hopefully somebody else will do this thing too someday, whenever they can. But it did take close to 40 years to get it out.
I like your interpretation of like being Wonder Woman after. I hadn't thought about it like that. I've talked to CG about like how much I love doing this job and how I will have like how it feeds my soul is how I've said it. Um, where you create that safe space of like sharing parts of what the hell that you've been through and then somebody else feels safe to share it. Um, and when I have those moments, which I have a lot of, working the way I do, it just, yeah, it makes me feel strong. So I like the word makes you feel like Wonder Woman because I hadn't thought of it like that. But it is very empowering. Um, Back to the like question of my whole story. I started this path of like I am a storyteller. So the idea of like stringing it all along and figuring out how to properly say it is like very much something that I have been thinking about and probably too much so. But when I started writing my book, I was 29, I think. That was when I started like actively going like, what happened when I was a kid? What have I experienced? What have I walked through? How do I know my story so that I can share my story? And like I said, I feel like I'm still unraveling parts of it, and I will be 40. So it's been 11 years and I'm still not there yet. So we'll see how long it takes.
Feels like there's a 40s theme here. Um, so the reason I posed this question is because the first time that I shared with people, as I said, I had like typed up all my notes, right? And I had my little thing. And I talked about two different instances in my little thing that I was holding in my hands. And in actually diving into this healing work, it brought to light, kind of similarly, Joe, to what you were saying, where it's like, oh, like this wasn't just like not good. Like this thing also was harm. Like this thing was also sexual violence. And so like as I started to like pull that thread, it became much more clear, not just like the sexual violence I'd experienced, but like the harm in other areas of my life. And so it became this like huge thing. Like, oh, like I started thinking it was like this one thing that happened and this one thing that happened. And like now I see it as the like, how do you begin to describe the like harm that's just like woven throughout your life in all these different areas? And my understanding of what my story is now is totally different. And when I shared the very first time, I thought it was my whole story. Right. And then like I found out a little bit more and then I thought that was my whole story. And then I found out, right? And to the point where now, because of like the length of time that I've been actively working through my traumas, that I don't think that there's going to be more like that I unravel at this point. And it took all of these decades to get to that point where I could actually like see and hold the entirety of it because kind of like what Brittany was saying, mentally was like kind of like chopped up into like all these different components where it's like, okay, well, I can look at this piece or I could look at this piece, but the understanding that these two pieces are connected and that there's actually like 17 things between them too that are also all connected um, was part of the like undoing the harm was being able to sit with seeing the breadth and the depth of it and being able to essentially just have the emotional space and the tolerance to say, okay, this is actually what it is, even though I previously thought it was like this thing over here. Um, so, and also like Christy, I feel like I'll let you know when I've got the whole thing figured out. Just give me a couple more decades, no problem. Um, and I loved what you were saying about the like the feeling, the empowerment and the connection and all of that. But on to our next question. We also often talk about in LTS the concept of having like the emotional hangover, right? After sharing Brittany, the expression on your face was priceless just there. What have your experiences been with emotional hangovers? And you can define it however it makes sense for you to define what that looks
Okay.
like.
So emotional hangover for me, like when I think back to the times when I share, because I also remember like sharing in a women's ministry or something, and then just having like this numbness, right? Or just kind of blank feeling. Um, Now I know, or even my brain goes a lot of different ways. Neurologically, in the telling, there's a dopamine hit, right? And so like the heart starts racing, um, different things happen physiologically in the body where it's like, oh, this is whatever, it feels uncomfortable or whatever. Um, and so the hangover, I realized my hangovers, I guess, were more, I don't want to say severe, but like they were more than what they probably now what I know that they could be is because of the dopamine component in that. And then if you think about neurologically in the telling and retelling and telling and retelling and telling and retelling, those neural channels that you're forming in that space. And so I have an awareness of that that I didn't have before. And so for me, I mean, I would just feel flat afterwards or just kind of really disconnected, which now I know was dissociation. Um, even in the emotional hangover component of like the safest place I've ever shared is in my cohort, um, LTS cohort. And so even in sharing in that, um, feeling just drained and so tired. Well, now what I know neurologically, right? We open up something in the memory network when we're doing the telling. regardless if it's safe, unsafe, whatever, right? Like there's an opening up that occurs in that. And um, so now I'm more prepared for that and know how to handle that emotional hangover. It doesn't happen like it used to happen because the pieces that I choose to focus on aren't necessarily opening something back up per se. Does that make sense? I may not be making sense today. But yeah, so very flat, very disconnected. Um, but I can go back into those spaces and rework that by knowing what I know now about what's occurring neurologically in my brain. And then then that's like a soothing over it. And then it really is like, do I trust this person enough to hold this? Not hold it, but like listen to it. And it's interesting how like that gets smaller and smaller, and also I just don't always want to retell it. There's that too.
I think you make a lot of sense. I love hearing how you describe things because a lot of the medical, psychological like terminology can be kind of out there for me. But when you say it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And I feel that. Um, I think emotional hangover is a very accurate phrase for anyone who, I guess if you've never had an alcohol hangover, it might be a little confusing, but if you have had one, then you can absolutely imagine. For me, I'm exhausted. My mind feels like mush. My body feels like it's been run over by an 18-wheeler. My arms and my legs feel heavy, like when I'm moving, I'm walking through like sludge or quicksand, and it takes a lot of physical energy to keep going. It was really beneficial. Our cohort was in the evening, and I vaguely recall I had brought when I told my story with the Louder Than Silence cohort, I had brought like a mug of tea and I was holding it because I had gotten cold and clammy, but the tea, even though it was warm, was just very soothing. And I wanted to get up to get more, and I couldn't stand. So we had taken a break after I had shared my story, and I just sat there cuddled in a blanket, holding my tea. And when we finished with our meeting, I went to bed. But the next day even was I think there was some disassociation and uh, there was a lightness also. There was a lightness to my soul, but there was also this kind of unraveling. And we don't share these personal experiences to scare anyone. I also think that this could be viewed similar to a really, really hard workout for people who like go to the gym or do the marathon training or whatever hard workout. You finish and you might even feel like throwing up. Um, you're a little disoriented, completely exhausted, your body's trembling. There's sometimes there's trembling. Um, you know that you're going to be sore the next couple of days, but you also know it's worth it. Unlike the alcohol hangover, it's not ever worth it. Um, but your muscles are growing. And so, whatever beautiful thing Christy said, these muscles, when you tell your story, are strengthening, and you like an exercise workout, like a really hard workout, you know that you're going to thank yourself once you get on the other side. And there is this kind of self-gratitude of doing the hard thing. And that makes it worth it.
Yeah, when we talk about the emotional hangover, I always thought about it in more than just the sharing of our story, but like anytime we do anything emotionally exhausting, having that just like afterwards, just that I don't know, like emptiness. Like you just poured so much out that you're just like need to self-soothe and self-calm. Um, but it was interesting sitting with this question now because I was realizing that my hangovers are just not what they used to be. Like I have come to realize that I'm an extremely emotional person and I like cry on a weekly or multiple times in a week now. And the version of me that was disassociated and trying to like always be logical would not cry. And when she did cry, I would like be exhausted for like 3 days. Like my eyes would be puffy, like my body would be achy, and it was like I felt like I had ran a marathon or I was like sick. Like it literally felt like I had the flu anytime that I like released emotions, especially sadness. And I think that the last 3 years I've just like allowed myself to grieve so much that now it's just like it's not I just don't I'll have times where I'm like, oh yeah, that was yesterday was tired, it was exhausting. I'm a little tired. I'm a little sensitive. If you say something, my feelings will get hurt more than usual. But it's not that same level of just like I can't move, I can't function, I don't know how to get up out of bed. And at first, like that's how it was. It was like the next day I wouldn't want to get out of bed. I would literally have a headache from it. Like it felt like an actual hangover. um, but I still do get the stage fright. So talk about emotional hangover. I still get the like emotional stage fright of like, okay, I'm gonna tell this thing that's scary, and I'll still get sweaty, and every time I share my story, though it does again like shrink, like the amount of like over analyzing how I'm gonna say it. It's like I'll do that for like the 10 minutes before and not 3 days, which is how it used to be. So it is nice to know that like as you learn to process emotions, the hangover shrinks.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can come up with an additional analogy. Um, because it is a workout, right? Like it is like an emotional like building that strength. And like I think it can also be likened to whenever like in our younger years where we had to take like those standardized tests or like SATs or whatever, where it's like this very intense, even like intellectual exercise. And then afterwards, you're just like, well, I can't like string together 5 words anymore. Like I'm just done. Like there's a lot of different metaphors for like what this experience is. And as Brittany was saying, this is not to like try to convince people not to share or that it's like too much to share or whatever. But also like if and when you share and you're like, what is happening to me? Like that is also why we're having these conversations to help people understand like it is normal to feel the downside of such the high intensity like initial input in whatever field, right? Whether it's a hard workout or whatever. And for me, I really was like disconnected from myself for quite a long time. And the thing that finally got through to me, was after one of the LTS sessions where I shared. The next morning I woke up and I remember thinking, how much did I drink last night? Because I just felt so bad. I was like nauseous, headache, groggy, like the whole bit. And then I was like, wait, I didn't drink anything last night. And then I realized it was just like all from the like emotional outpouring that I had done. And it's like, oh yeah, like it really is it really is like a hangover. Um and it's been really interesting, similarly that it's not as intense now as it, once was. And there's something to be said for like when we've had things stored inside of us for so long that of course when you let those out, it has a much greater impact, right? But like there's not the same level of intensity each and every time. And now that I've been doing this work for quite some time, it's like I can just like throw something into the mix now. And it's just like, well, yeah, like this is part of like my work and like this is, what makes sense to share, at this point in time. And so it's been encouraging to see that trend. And there have been some times where like I remember a couple of times where like I just like couldn't work the next day. Like I was just like out of commission. And all of that is fine. Like in coming to terms with like it's fine to actually just feel what I feel, even if it's not like fun or productive or whatever I feel like I'm supposed to be. But just being okay with the like, yeah, there was a lot of pain there. So of course, in letting the pain out, it had a big impact. And and I think that that's something that hopefully we can hold on to the grace for each of our experiences and for anybody listening, like as you share, I hope you can hold on to the grace for yourself too, that it doesn't have to be perfect or all put together nicely. And if you feel hungover the next day, that doesn't mean you did something wrong or that you shouldn't have or any of those things. It just is part of the process of getting to the other side. Um, as much as we might not like that some days. But sadly, alas, we are out of time. So, any last thoughts from the three of you before we wrap up for today? No? All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Louder Than Silence podcast. If you'd like more information, please visit us at louderthansilence.org or follow us on Instagram at louderthansilence.org. This podcast and all of our programs at LTS are offered at no cost to participants, so please consider donating today to support this work. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for the most current episodes. We'll see you next month.